Hi, I'm Rainer, and welcome to my training room. Back to working on the same area as I have the last couple of videos. A couple of videos ago, I did this background building, picked this up at a train show, and then in my last video, I was working on getting all of these switches in the track to be controlled remotely by using some servos and some Arduino Nanos. So if you want to take a look at those, I will put the link up in the corner for the last video. Now that I've been working in this area, I decided I need to, before I do the scenery here, because there's a couple of buildings that I've already built that are supposed to be here, and this tape is kind of holding one of the wires in place so it doesn't fall through the layout. But before I put these buildings back in place, I want to get a little bit more of the ballast and stuff down on the tracks back here. But before I do that, I want to finish up or get closer to finished on what I want to do in the back wall here for a backdrop. Now, back here, it's just this light blue paint. My scenery backdrop ends there. These are my photos that I've printed. Had them printed at Staples as banners for backdrops. I've done that all the way around my upper layout. You can see some of it up here. So I decided that I think what I'm going to do is continue some more backdrop down here and see how I can make it work out. And I didn't want to use the same photos for the rest of it. So I found another photo that I had taken last summer when I was on vacation. It's actually a photo that I took while I stopped in Wawa, Ontario. There's a little kind of a rest stop beside the Wawa Goose, if you want to look that up. Anyway, I was sitting there just taking some pictures with my phone, and there's a photo that I took of just some trees kind of looking out in the distance, and so I kind of did some heavy cropping on that and had that printed out in a banner. So I'm going to see if I can make that work as a background behind some of these buildings. Now, I'm not quite sure how it's going to work out, because what I did was when I cropped it, I made the trees kind of more of the vertical part of the photo is taken up by trees than what is over there. So I'm not quite sure how I'm going to get that to blend. Maybe I can put a building over the joint, but I'll see how that works out. So what I've been doing for my backdrops is I just find a photo that I like, do some heavy cropping on it, and then I get them printed. I just do it online and then go pick it up usually next day, and I get a 2-foot by 4-foot banner printed. Now what I do with them is I will pull this photo out here. I haven't done anything with it yet. This is how it comes printed. It is just 2 photos on a 2-foot by 4-foot banner, and what I then do is I just cut it along the middle here lengthwise with a knife, and I end up with 2 1-foot by 4-foot banners that I can put end to end. What I did with this photo is the top and the bottom are actually the same photo, but one is a mirror image of the other, so that I can kind of join them end to end and they will still work. Now, as you can see at the ends, it goes up very high on both of them. So I haven't decided yet how I'm going to kind of make the ends match up with that, because it's a lot taller. The blue is slightly different as well. So I think I'm going to try to kind of disguise it behind a taller building or something, and hopefully I can make that work. What I've also done, as you can see back here, is these are just some wall sections out of a Walther's kit. I picked it up at a train show. It's kind of a sort of triangular shaped building, but I'm not going to use it as that. It's a warehouse building that Walther's makes, but I'm going to use it and to use some of the wall sections as flats. I may not use all of them. I just stood them up back here to see how they would look and see how tall they are. So I'm going to see if I can make, between these wall flats and these photos that I have printed and a few other things, I'm going to see if I can get a bit of a backdrop happening back here, and let's see how it turns out. So I took the banner and cut it in half lengthwise to create 2 1-foot high by 4-foot long banners or backdrop sections, and then figured out which way I could put them, because they would actually kind of match up either way around because they were mirror images. So figured out which way I wanted to put them on, and taped them onto the back wall with some double-sided tape. And I did it differently this time around than I've done it previously. In the past, I've taken the double-sided tape and put it on the banner, and then stuck it to the wall. This time I tried to put the double-sided tape on the wall first and then put the banner onto that, and had a small disaster because the end of the banner actually curled around before I got it up and grabbed onto the tape. And so I lost a few inches of the backdrop banner on the one end. And so I had to overlap them a little bit differently. So the second piece, I put the tape back onto the backdrop and then lifted it onto the wall, pushed it into place, and it worked a lot better. At least for me, it seems to work a little bit better. So I got the backdrop in place, and then I decided to start building some background flats. So I had the Walther's Reliable Warehouse and Storage building, which is kind of a sort of triangular shaped building if you build it as instructed in the kit or as designed. But I just took two of the walls, which is basically the back wall and one of the end walls, and I modified them a little bit so that I could join them together and glue them together flat. So I glued them together, the two wall sections together, with methyl ethyl ketone, some MEK, and I also added a strip of styrene on the back for reinforcement. Added some wood strips around to give it a little bit of depth because it's just going to be going flat on the wall, but I want a little bit of a gap between there so I can put a background image and maybe a few LED lights inside to illuminate it so it looks like it's more than just a flat building on the wall. And then I decided, because I had an issue with where the two backdrops meet, the background hills are completely different heights, and I just thought I would disguise it with a scratch built building. I had a sheet of evergreen, I think clapboard styrene. I took a piece of that and then I cut some window holes into it and fabricated a building using various pieces of styrene, some windows I had left over from other projects, and some strips of wood, and made a building that kind of overhangs the track just a little bit, but is tall enough to cover the transition between the hills. And at this point, both of the background flats that I've built, I have them primed black, and now I need to start adding some windows. So as you can see, at this point, I have the backdrop back here, and I have temporarily put these buildings back in just to kind of get a better idea of what the sight lines are going to be. I've moved that building down just a little bit. That's the backdrop building that I built earlier. And then down there, you can see the end of that new Walther's building that I built the flat, and then the scratch built building at the end. Now, in case anybody's wondering why I didn't just move this taller building down to cover that seam in the window, it's because of how the tracks go underneath that building. The track over there at the wall, the track spacing is a little bit different, and there's some other tracks that come out that are too close, and that building actually just wouldn't fit over there above the track. So I decided to create my own scratch-built building just using styrene, and both of those buildings are now primed flat black. The black primer has dried, so I can start doing some painting on them. So the one of them is brick. The Walther's building is brick, and then that one is going to be, I'm going to try to make it look kind of like a corrugated metal building, so it'll probably be painted gray with some rust stains, things like that on it. And both of them will be getting some lighting inside as well as kind of a background image inside, so that when you do look through the windows at all, you'll see something other than just a blank wall or my trees on the other side of the building. So they do need something inside. So I'm going to start working on that. There's a little bit of a light blue showing at the bottom because the banner didn't quite work out the way I wanted perfectly. So I'm going to be painting that dark green and then putting probably some static grass and some other things down at the bottom just to blend the edge from the layout going into the backdrop. So I'm just going to continue working on this. It's taking me a while, actually. What you don't realize in this video is it's been a few days since I started working on this because, hey, it's summertime. And I have a lot of other things happening. My wife and I have been going on some camping trips, and I have been painting the outside of the house in the mornings before it gets too hot. So I've done one wall one day, doing another wall the other day. So other than just building little plastic houses, I'm actually painting my house that I live in, the outside of it. So we've got a lot of things going on here because it's summertime, so my videos aren't coming out as frequently as they do the rest of the year, and it's taking me a little bit longer to get these things done, but that's okay. Sometimes when it's too hot in the afternoon, or if it's raining or whatever, it's a good time to do a few things down here. So I'm going to keep plugging away at this and get back to you with when I have a little bit more done on it. So this is the Walther's kit now that I've painted the brick. Used a mix of these two Liquitex paints, some red oxide and raw sienna, mixed them up and just painted them, kind of lightly ran the brush over. And this is a wide brush that's fairly stiff. And so I just painted the kind of the surface of the bricks was my goal. And it's kind of a modeled, different amounts of paint all over it, but that's okay because I'm trying to make it look like somewhat older, dirtier brick. And as you can see, the black lines in the mortar joints show through more in some places than others, but that's the idea with this. So it looks kind of like old brick. I've done this on a number of buildings. It's for me, it's an easy way to get the kind of look that I want for them. And now I've got to paint the foundations down here, which are going to be concrete. So I'm just going to paint them with some gray paint. And those are parts right there that are actually going into my other building, and I'll get to that shortly. But at this point, I've got to paint the bottom of this gray. Once that paint is dry, I'm going to start putting the windows in. Here's all the window frames that would have been for this whole kit, so I won't be using all of them, but the window frames, I've painted them, just spray painted with some dark brown paint. So I'm going to get the foundation painted, then I'm going to put the window frames in. And I'll show you what I've done on the back. So as I mentioned just now in the video, I put like a wood frame around this so that I can later put a backing on this, and it leaves a small gap in between so I can put some lights in here. And I also put, I don't know if I'm going to use them all yet, but I put these little copper plates in here because sometimes when I put LEDs in here, even though I've painted it black, I don't want a hot spot shining through. So if I glue the LED to these copper things, it's not going to shine through the wall. It's just going to reflect it this way. So for now, I'm going to paint this foundation down here gray. Once that dries, I'm going to flip it over, put the window frames in, and then I'll start gluing the windows in, put some lights in, and put a backing on it. And that'll be it for this building, for the back wall. And then I will get to my other building, but I'll show you right now what I've got with it a little bit closer. And again, this is the building that I scratch built from styrene. This is kind of this evergreen clapboard siding. I was thinking of painting it gray, but I had some of this Tamiya light sand, so I thought I'd try that instead. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to be doing for the window framing color, but here's the windows. They fit into these holes. So I've got window frames for the back, and then I've got to put some window glass of some kind. These are the two buildings I'm going to start working on now. The bottom down here will also be painted a gray, so I'll probably paint this at the same time because it's going to be kind of a gray concrete look. And when it goes on the tracks, you'll see it overhangs the tracks a little bit. So I'll be putting lights inside and as well as some light down here. There's going to be a couple of loading doors here and a man door right there. So that's my plan for these buildings, and I've got to get them finished up and into place. So once I got the gray foundations on both of the buildings painted, I started installing the window frames. So I installed the window frames in the brick Walther's building first and glued all those in with using super glue, because there was some paint on the window frames. And I thought that super glue would probably work better than using the MEK, because the MEK works really well if it's clean styrene for both parts. But because there was some paint on the edges of the doors and window frames, I decided to use the super glue to glue those in place. And then I did the same thing with the window frames for my scratch-built warehouse building, glued the window frames in. And then I set the scratch-built building aside because there was a lot more that I needed to do on it. So I then continued by gluing in the window glass on the brick building. For that, I used MEK to glue them because there was clear styrene onto the back of the window frames, and the back of the window frames didn't have any paint on them. So I glued all those in place. Once that was done, it was time to install the LEDs. And I just put a bunch of LEDs on those little copper pieces that I showed you earlier in the video. And also put two little LEDs on the front above a couple of the doorways, above a loading door and a man door. For the LEDs, I did a little bit of experimenting with my 12-volt power supply, and I initially tried putting them all in a loop just in series without a resistor, but that was too many LEDs on a single loop. I expected that would happen, but I thought I would give it a try. But I ended up putting them in two loops, kind of two series loops of LEDs with a resistor in each loop, and that worked out okay. And so to finish up the Walther's building, what I did was then I finally cut using a couple of pieces of thin styrene, cut a back wall for it, and then glued on some images that I had printed from online, just some general warehouse interior pictures, and just glued those onto the styrene. And then when that had dried, I glued that to the back of the building. So there's a very shallow gap between the face and the window frames going back to the background of the building. And I tested it on the workbench. So when you turn the lights on, because there is a little bit of a gap, it does light up the area. And so a number of the windows light up, and the windows have different amounts of light coming out of them to make it look a little bit more realistic. And because there's a background in there, you can't really see much of what you're looking at through the windows, but it's a little bit different colored and different images kind of showing partially through the windows, so it adds a little bit of an element of realism to it. And once that building was ready to go, I started working on the scratch-built warehouse building. And so the next thing I kind of did on it was I started to paint the window frames, because as I was going along, I wasn't sure of how the look was going to be, and I put, using little thin pieces of wood, I put window frames around the outside of the window openings. And I did the same thing to create kind of a border around the edges of the buildings, around the styrene, to kind of frame it in. I think it looked better that way. But then I ended up just carefully painting all of those little pieces of wood, the window frames and the framing around the edge of or the trim around the edge of the building. I painted that gray. And once that had dried, I did some weathering on it. And for the weathering, I wanted to do the weathering before I put the window glass in place, because I didn't want to spray on that. So I used some Floquil grime, old Floquil paint, for some of the front wall on the lighter color to kind of dirty it up. And as I was doing it, of course, it picked up a little bit of the darker paint that slightly dissolved, and I kind of gave it a wash with some of the diasol that is the original thinner for the Floquil paint. So I did that to kind of dirty up the front of the building. And at the same time, while that was drying, I took a piece of styrene tubing and made a little vent stack to put beside the building as well, glued a little end on it, and painted it silver, left that to dry, and then went back to the building. Once the wash I'd put on it had dried a bit, I went and brought it over to the spray booth and just kind of lightly sprayed on some black and kind of dark gray paint on it, just to dirty it up a little bit more. Once all of that had dried, I flipped it over and installed the lights, and I put 2 lights in it to shine down kind of over the loading doors. And then I put a bunch of lights on the same kind of thing on the little copper pieces on the inside. And going back to the other building, what I realized with the LEDs was I was still getting a little bit of glow through the wall when I tested the lighting. So I actually painted the back of the wall around those little copper plates with some more black paint, just to make sure that I didn't have any light showing through where I didn't want it. And I think on the Walther's building, I think it's because the image is so close to the back of it. Once I had all the lights working inside and I was happy with that, I then, because those window frames were just something I had from somewhere else, I didn't have any exact window glass for them. So I just used some opaque laminating sheet, cut those to size, and just placed those over the windows and super glued those in place just to create a window glass. And then for the back of the building, I cut a sheet of thin styrene to cover the back of the building, and I had just had some random warehouse interior images that I had downloaded and printed on my color printer, and I just glued those to the styrene and then glued that to the back of the building. Now, the windows are so opaque on this building that when you turn the lights on, you really can't see what's inside, but it does give you some color variation and the illusion of depth when you have something in there, an image on the back, rather than just a blank wall or a blank surface. So now I have the buildings back in place. I have my brick Walther's building here, and you can just kind of see it, I think, in the camera peeking out from behind this building, the other Walther's backdrop building that I built and put in place earlier. So they're all in place, glued into place. The lights are working. This one, as you can probably see, there's a couple of lights above the doors that are shining down. That building at the end, that's all weathered and kind of dirty looking, there are a couple of lights that shine down. I think it might be just kind of hiding behind this building. Maybe if I move this smokestack, you can see it. Yeah, there's a little bit of a light shining down. You can see it above the boxcar. There's 2 of those lights, one above each of the loading doors. And I'm happy with how it looks so far. What I'd like to do is put a little bit more roof details on the building that's back there, as well as on my taller warehouse, because both of them stick out far enough from the wall to be able to do that. On this one, I can't, because it's pretty tight against the wall. There's really no room for any details on the roof. I also need to build a bit of a loading dock where there's room. There's some room in front of that lower building, and I can also fit a shallow loading dock between where that boxcar is sitting and the front of that building. So I need to do that kind of thing still, and those tracks need to be ballasted and stuff like that. But for now, I'm happy with how those buildings turned out. And really, this whole thing is a pretty inexpensive project, because I picked up that reliable warehouse building for really cheap at a train show somewhere along the line. This backdrop at the back is just a banner. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, it's just a banner that I had printed at Staples from a photo that I took with my phone last summer. And this building over here is just some pieces of evergreen styrene and some pieces of wood. I have a big box of scale lumber that was donated to me years ago. So, and the doors and windows are just leftover pieces from other kits that I've built somewhere along the line. So anyway, hopefully this guy might give you some ideas of what else you might be able to do on your layout, just kind of things for backgrounds and stuff that you can do. Like I've said earlier, my idea is that these buildings, potentially that back building, will also be tied in with some kind of a conveyor or something going across the tracks. And there's some more buildings that I need to build kind of off camera behind my back here that are all going to be part of what I'm seeing as my paper mill complex eventually. So hopefully this gives you some ideas of how to do things. There's kind of no real right or wrong way. You just kind of work away at what works and what looks good to you. What I'm thinking of doing also is from this building in the back, kind of working my way across toward my actual rail yard. There's a little bit of a blue gap where the wall shows below the backdrop, and I'm thinking of maybe using a combination of some longer static grass and maybe building some fence to put along there, just to kind of tie that backdrop in to the layout. And I think maybe a fence combined with some, kind of longer static grass and weeds and things like that might work well on there. So I'm going to look at doing that one of these days. So for now, thanks for watching. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe, and see you next time. And like I mentioned earlier in the video, it might be a little bit of time before I get to the next video, because it is summertime, and I've got a lot of other projects on the go here, but I am still managing to get things down here whenever the weather is too either wet or too hot to be doing things outside. So see you next time.